Welcome to Truth and Company Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, John, the Truth Dioria, and today we have a different kind of interview. No random 20 questions today. We're actually going to interview Malissa Smith, who's an author, boxing historian, and a public speaker. Welcome, Malissa Smith.
Oh, hi.
How you doing, Melissa?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on the show, John.
Well, first off, I just want to mention really quick, not only have you just written the book called The Promise of Women's Boxing, a Momentous New Era for the Sweet Science, and that's actually what we're here to talk about. It just came out, published June 4th, 2024, so definitely go out there and get it. You can get it at thepromiseofthewomensboxing.com, but you've also written two other books, and I don't want to overshadow those at all, The Difference and A History of Women's Boxing, right?
Yeah, I mean, the difference, I contributed a chapter about my own personal journey in the sport called How Boxing Uncaged Me. And A History of Women's Boxing I published in 2014. It is and remains the only history of the sport. I'm just hoping there are folks out there who are excited enough to want to contribute to that and improve upon it.
And also you have your own blog, which is called girlboxing.org. So
Yep.
People can read about what you're doing all the time with women's boxing and stay updated that way as well. And you're also part of a podcast on YouTube. Now, I don't know if it's other places, but I've seen it on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's called The War Room with 2 A's. And that seems to be going pretty well as well. So, I mean, and you guys talk about a lot of different things going on with boxing on there.
Yeah. We try to uncover the stories that don't always make it into the headlines on boxing. Things like what's really happening in the amateurs, or what is all this stuff about boxing in Saudi Arabia. Really just taking on topics that don't always get covered.
So you're a busy lady.
Yeah, I guess so.
I don't know how you have time to be out promoting this book right now. You got a lot of other stuff going on as well.
Well, yeah, I'm a caregiver for my husband, so that's really my full-time job. So all of this is just labor of love, because I'm very passionate about, the exploits of women in the ring and giving them their due, and giving the general public and the boxing public an understanding of what they sacrifice in order to entertain us as professional athletes.
Yeah, let's go back a little bit and explain to the fans kind of how all this started, okay? What was your first introduction to the sport of boxing?
When I was a little kid, I used to like to watch boxing. I used to like to watch boxing and wrestling. And, we first got a TV. I was about 9 years old. This is 1963. And that's the shows my brother and I would watch. And then we would practice half Nelsons, full Nelsons from the wrestling. And this is with wrestlers like the Prince of Darkness and Bruno Sammartino. So, I mean, it was really quite an era for boxing, for wrestling. And then we'd watch the boxing shows. And, I lived on a pretty rough block on the Lower East Side. It was half Italian, half Puerto Rican. And the boys would fight on the street. And you always knew the boy that had real science. They were the ones that never got touched. They were tight. They only threw a few punches. They ducked out of the way, and everybody else was being wild, And I was like, I want to be like
Street Fighter
them.
style.
I want to fight that way. I don't want to get my hair pulled. I want to be able to duck out of the way. So I had an uncle who taught my brother and I, the old 1-2, and I felt so proud that I knew how to turn a jab. I mean, that kept me going for a long time. Then it's like, well, wait a minute, I can do this. It's okay. So in my early 40s, I walked into Gleason's gym and started learning the sweet science for myself, really to stay in shape and to just get a real understanding of what this amazing sport that I had been following as a fan for so long was really all about. That is what then introduced me to the fact that there were really these amazing women who were boxing as professionals and amateurs. And because it's Gleason's Gym, which is really at the forefront of embracing women in the sport, just to give them a plug, there are 15 world champions, professional world champions that have come out of that one gym in New York. I mean, that's crazy. That does not happen in any other gym in the world. And you can't even count the number of titles that have been won by Gleason's denizens who were, in the amateurs themselves, whether it's Golden Gloves or national championships. So it really was an extraordinary place to be, especially in the 90s when I started boxing. I guess it was 97. And I, sat alongside people like, doing sit-ups with Melissa Hernandez, or watching Heather Hardy when she first came into the gym and seeing her.
Speaking of her, I'm representing her today. Got the
Yeah,
heat shirt
awesome.
on. Gleason's Gym, Heather Hardy,
or
women's
Alicia,
boxing.
absolutely, or Alicia Ashley, who was, the first woman in the gym to have been inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame last year. And, to just see her career as a fighter, and then as her career as a trainer, because, women always got to work. Is this little teeny sliver of line of people that aren't women, who aren't working while they're pursuing a professional career. So I really felt very honored to have these folks kind of as my inspiration. And then when I got more seriously into it, I had, in my 50s, I went back to school. I finished the BA I had never completed, and then went ahead and got my master's degree. And as part of that, in liberal studies, why not? It's my degree. I decided to do my thesis on women's boxing. And my question was, we think of boxing as a hyper-masculine sport. It's like, it's just manly men do boxing. And yet, how do you account for the fact that women have been competing for 300 years? Since boxing was created by James Figg in the early 1720s in England, the notion of prize fighting with fists. So it's like, well, how did that happen? So my question was, it's like a boundary in motion. And I was very interested in the idea of this gender binary of male and femaleness, and where women's boxing fit on that line, because sometimes it's accepted and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes there's this hue and cry where people say, women can't box, that's a male sport. Look, the Olympics said that until 2012. Women can't box, it's a male sport.
But let me ask you, though, when you first walked into Gleason's Gym, what was the reason behind that? I mean, all these years later, after you had watched it on TV or taught a little bit about boxing from your uncle, whatever, why all of a sudden, all these years later, you decided to walk into Gleason's Gym?
Because it's something that had been percolating in my mind for a while. Because, there was things like boxercise in the 80s, and I had heard little smatterings that there were women who were boxing professionally.
But I mean, were you thinking, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to become an amateur, I'm going to become a pro, or were you just thinking, let me go in and get in shape and things like that?
I really don't know that I had something in mind other than I had to do it. I had to feel what it was to box for myself and my own growth. And I had an interesting relationship to it, because I realized I didn't want to compete, because I was already in competition with myself. Because what boxing gave to me was my own sense of my own power. That sort of like, the distance between me and the bag was like a circle of power, or me and the pads, or me and somebody else that I was sparring with.
But now, why Gleason's Gym, though? You could have walked into any low-level gym, made no difference, but you walked into one of the biggest known gyms in the world.
Well, I was in the neighborhood.
Okay, that makes sense. I just didn't know if there was a reason. Like, you're thinking, okay, this is a big name gym. There's going to be big names in here. It had to be a little intimidating, though.
I have to say, that first day I crossed the threshold. I mean, I had taken a little bit of boxercise at a local gym, and it was like in my health club, and it was like, well, this is terrible. This is not for me. I need to go to Gleason's. And when I finally did, it was sort of like a New Year's resolution for me. This was in January of 1997. I crossed in, and at that time it was on Front Street, and it was a very cavernous place with very high ceilings, very huge physical plant. And sitting at the desk was Bruce Silverglade, who was the owner of Gleason's Gym. And on the corner of the table was a chess set. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm home. This is good. This is for me. A place where you can have boxers and play chess. I'm all about this. and Bruce, introduced himself. I said, hi, I want to come box. And he's like, oh, come with me. So welcoming. And whatever jitters I may have had walking up the stairs to the first floor gym and crossing over that through the door into this amazing place was immediately let go. And I just started to train. My first trainer was a guy named Johnny Greenwich, who he was pretty kooky and very old school. Calisthenics was always done with a broomstick. He didn't even use pads. It was just about learning the rudiments of the sport and using various bags, using the slip rope. Did a lot of work on the slip rope and sparring. And that's how I learned the sport.
And I wanted to get to that part. Did you actually did spar then?
Yeah, I sparred then. I sparred till about probably 5-6 years ago. I stopped sparring because I'm old.
Yeah, but I didn't know how far you went into training.
Yeah,
so
no,
you actually did do legit boxing training as a boxer.
I did legit boxing training, and I know what it is to get punched. I have a jaw that is still a little funky, but what I realized is I wasn't in it to compete. It was really more a competition with myself. It was a journey of physical exploration of my own being, and also uncovering a lot of the trauma that I had had as a younger person. And for me, boxing, spending hours on a heavy bag and beating the crap out of it was almost like punching myself and opening up all those old scars that had never quite healed over the right way. So to me, I credit boxing with giving me writing. I credit boxing with giving me the rest of my life.
So now you mentioned your uncle taught you like the basic 1-2s.
Yeah.
Now, was your uncle an actual boxer?
No, he was just a guy.
Just a guy.
He was a guy, and but as I said, I used to watch boxing. I loved boxing. I knew who Muhammad Ali was.
But I mean, how did you as a young girl get to watch boxing? I mean,
we would just put it on the we would just, it was my brother and me and my mom, and we would just had full range of the TV. So I just put it on, and I used to like to watch sports. And then when I was a teenager, in the afternoon on ABC, I used to watch Wide World of Sports, and they would have, whether it was Olympic boxing or boxing from Europe or, a Muhammad Ali fight that was, somewhere outside of the United States, but it was also part of the culture. And I think people need to understand that in a way that boxing is not part of our culture here now. It's really become very much a niche sport. In the early 70s, when I was a teenager or, came of age in the 70s, everybody knew who Muhammad Ali was. And it wasn't just his figure as a boxer, but as a public intellectual almost, in the sense that he was a magnet of opinion that was really strong. And he was a true activist for equity, not only in sports, but for Black Americans, for all underserved people. When he, refused to be drafted, that was huge news. When he was kicked out of boxing for a while and unable to fight at all, that was very much part of popular culture. So I was very affected by that, and I was affected by him as a figure. In that period of time, late 60s into the 70s, I was affected by him as a fighter. And then when he came back and he had those amazing fights with people like Kenny Norton and the Joe Frazier trilogy and all of that, we were all of us invested in that. Like to me, actually, in terms of my favorite fighter, it was Kenny Norton. I mean, I thought he was a poem. I still think he's a poem when I watch old videos of him. Then, I just kept watching the sport, from time to time, whether it was Olympics or just what's on TV. Oh, there's a boxing match. Cool. Let's watch it. So I always maintained an interest in the sport, loved the middleweights, and then followed a little bit of Tyson, Tyson and the Lennox Lewis, that whole era. and then
So
started
I was gonna
Friday night
ask,
fights, you know.
how do you walk into a gym one day just to train, and then you end up becoming a boxing historian? But I can tell by just the way you're talking that it was already instilled in you, because you didn't just love to go find out to be a boxer. It sounds like you just loved everything about the sport and people in the sport, and you seek the knowledge. It sounds like you're just like a sponge for boxing knowledge.
Yeah, it's kind of what happened. And, you know, once I started to really explore it from as an academic endeavor, it really overwhelmed me to see just, well, let me take that back a step. I used to love watching boxing movies, you know, and that the tropes of a boxing film, you know, coming up from nowhere and then becomes a champion and then loses everything and gains everything, and then, you know, there they go into the sunset. And, you know, maybe it's a terrible sunset where, you know, it's Anthony Quinn and they're, you know, he's a punch drunk wrestler, you know, or you know, it's Marlon Brando. I mean, again, this is we we don't see this now, and I'm sorry that that's the case. That kids now, a teenager now, a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old now, does not understand boxing as this cultural phenomenon in the way that it really resonated through the culture that I grew up in. You know,
Do you
in the
have a
60s and
favorite
70s.
boxing movie?
Yeah, The Harder They Fall. I mean, there's a bunch of them on the waterfront. I mean,
A
they
lot of the
all
old school ones.
a lot of the old school ones, and of course Rocky was very important when Sylvester Stallone did that film as an independent filmmaker. Again, it resonated through the culture at a time when boxing was still very much on in the consciousness of people's minds, and that's because it was on television. You know, there were fights every week. Again, ABC, Wide World of Sports, they always had boxing. They had, you know, they had skiing, they had this, they had that, but they always had boxing. And Howard Cosell, as you know, this insane figure in sports journalism, broadcast journalism, was also really important as a cultural icon and as a meme, what we would call a meme today. You know, we still have him as a meme, although people don't understand who Howard Cosell was and
True.
how significant he was, because he was completely nuts. But you know, if people really want to know about boxing, watch When We Were Kings, that brilliant documentary about the George Foreman Muhammad Ali fight in Africa. There's so much to it in terms of the place of boxing, the place of blackness in boxing. And I say this as a white person, so you know, I say this with the deepest of respect, but it's also the generation I grew up in, and there was that first opportunity of amazing pride. You know, John King doing this show in Africa and bringing all these amazing musicians like James Brown and the Fania All Stars, who are, you know, what like the meaning of salsa in New York City. They embody that. I mean, that was extraordinary opportunity, and was a very important and significant event, not only as a boxing show, because it was an amazing boxing show. You know, the lexicon of what a rope-a-dope is, right?
Yeah.
That we know what rope-a-dope is because we watched Muhammad Ali getting, you know, George Foreman to beat the crap out of his body.
So how did you find your passion as a writer? When did that come about? Were you, as a kid, did you write poems, write short stories, and then you kind of tied it in with the boxing years later?
Yeah, it's pretty much. I mean, I was, you know, it was as a 13-year-old, you know, like many a 13-year-old would write agonizing reams of poetry that filled many notebooks. Still have them, which is really very funny. But they were of the moon, blue balloon variety. By the time I was 14, they were, you know, starting to get into some deepness. But I was afraid of it. You know, I had held a lot of fear in my life, and it took me to my 40s to discovering my own acknowledging my own vulnerability, which happened in a boxing gym, to
So
let me
basically, you went
face
from
it.
as a child to a young adult using poetry and writing as therapy to becoming a later adult using boxing as your therapy.
Yeah, in a way. That's a nice way with a lot of therapy in between with therapists. That's a great way of putting it, John. But yeah, and then then it was sort of like, well, okay, how do I understand this at a deeper level? And that's what brought me into it from an academic standpoint, which then gave me the opportunity to write the history of the sport, which,
So
as I
you
said,
went to
didn't exist.
school for writing then.
No, well, I went to school. I studied history. Finished my BA and did it in history. Then I did a degree in liberal studies, which was a gamut of, again, sort of cultural understandings, because that's my interest, is culture, uh, and my questions always have to do with the conflicts between one idea and another idea. They clash all the time, and to me, boxing is the perfect embodiment of that, of taking a very brutal sport, and yet we call it an art. We call it the sweet science. Why do we call it the sweet science? Because, yeah, you have to be this immensely technically proficient human being, like a machine almost, to be able to perfect just a jab, never mind everything else. And then you have the artistry of a fighter in the ring improvising with another fighter. And why we love the best fighting the best is because we have this true sense of the fairness of the sport, and the fact that you have two absolute brilliant technicians displaying this improvisational brilliance in front of us in real time. It's kind of like if you do it in jazz terms, you have John Coltrane and Miles Davis riffing off each other, right? To in the same moment in real time, and that's what boxing becomes. And what I wanted to understand is, where do women fall in that? Because it's like we want to negate that they even exist in the sport, and yet there they are, working so hard to perfect it, to be that improvisational art that is the sweet science. So those were the questions that I wanted to answer in terms of what the history of the sport was, and what its place was in different eras of time.
So when did you make that decision to bring your two passions together, the writing and the boxing, and go, you know what, I'm going to write a boxing book?
Well, I started in 2010. I started the Girl Boxing blog in 2010, in part to kind of teach myself to write every day, and to get over my fear of putting out work. And I had taken writing workshops and so on, so I was poised for that, and I had published some poems and things, but doing a daily blog really helped me, and it kind of grounded me in the process. And then I was writing for school to finish the master's degree, and once that happened, I started to give papers on the sport, and I was approached by a publisher, Roman and Littlefield, who was my publisher for the second book as well, and they said, hey, listen, we're expanding our titles on women's sports, and we're really interested in what you're doing. Give us a book proposal. We'd really like to see a history of the sport. So I wrote up a book proposal, which I'd never done before, and enlisted the help of a friend who's an editor, put that together, and came up with a 300-year arc to cover, and covered the sport from its humble beginnings in the early 1720s in England on through the 2012 Olympics. And then my second book, which was just published, The Promise of Women's Boxing, picks up the story pretty much the day after the Olympics. It's like, okay, now what?
And that's what I wanted fans to understand, because when you look at both books, you're thinking, okay, both of these books seem to be about history and women's boxing. What is the difference? And that's what I wanted to clarify, so that fans will go out and not only get the new book, but they'll go get the first book, because they're almost like a continuation, right?
It is very much so. I would say the second book is more intimate, because it's got 200 50 pages of text that really focuses on a smaller period of time. Although, I also have an introduction that gives, about 20-page overview of the history of the sport so that a person can come into it not having read the first book and be able to really to ground themselves in the history of like key elements of the history and then go forward. But in the second book, I really wanted to also demonstrate how pivotal the Olympics were in the sense of finally being sort of legitimizing the sport as an Olympic sport. Because we always look to the Olympics as like, wow, I want to be in the Olympics. I have a quote from Marion Trimier, who was known as Lady Tiger. She was a big boxer in the 70s. When she first started, she shaved all her hair. She was like, so she had a chrome dome, and they used to at that time call her the Black Kojak because Kojak was on TV. Probably folks don't even know what Kojak was, but anyway. And then, but it became her signature, and she has a quote very early on in her career where she says, I just want to be in the Olympics. And this was in 1974, 75. And she's like, I just want to, be able to be in the Olympics. And at that time, there was an attempt to put some women's boxing on at Madison Square Garden, but New York State, the Boxing Commission refused to grant a license, and that led to a series of lawsuits, which eventually legalized the sport for women in 1978. But for Lady Tiger, it left her out, in the sense that she couldn't box in New York. But she did have fights. She ended up moving to California. But the point was, as early as 1975, she's saying, I want to be in the Olympics. I want to make that happen. How do I make that happen? Well, it didn't. It took till 2012.
Okay, and speaking of that, let's talk about the new book. So now you bring up a lot of women in this book, a lot of people that are familiar with them right now. I mean, it's not just about the history. A lot of these women are active right now. They're in the ring right now. We're seeing them on TV right now. So tell me about some of the bigger names that are in the book that you had to actually sit down and talk to.
Well, Clarissa Shields, and she very graciously wrote the foreword for the book. And Clarissa, I talk a lot about her because she is so hugely significant. She's the first American woman to win a gold medal in the Olympics. She is the first American boxer to repeat a gold medal in the Olympics. No other boxer, male or female, has ever done that in the history of the sport. She is a 3-time undisputed champion. And she's also, if we think of that classic boxer story of the person coming up from nothing and making it in the world of boxing, that old trope, she is that. I mean, her early life was the stuff of nightmares. And yet she found in the boxing gym a way of coming into her own being, finding her own self. And that is something I really wanted to tease out in terms of her story and what her place is as a cultural icon for the sport, even though in the United States of America, we barely recognize her. She did not end up on a Wheaties box in 2012. She didn't end up on a Wheaties box in 2016. She did turn pro. And as a pro, she's made really significant strides in the United States for women in boxing. Because, her first fight, she got $50,000. Most women in the United States who box never saw a paycheck for $50,000 in their entire careers. You could pretty much add it all together. They didn't make $50,000. So that was a huge thing. So what I show is that the women who entered the sport as Olympians, who had had long careers in the amateurs as national and international champions, entered the sport at a different type of trajectory. So that's Clarissa Shields, and of course Katie Taylor from Ireland, who she had her fight also in 2016. She had signed with Matchroom and Eddie Hearn, and part of that decision to go with them was the understanding that they were mapping out a trajectory that would bring her and the sport of women's boxing on a huge trajectory into the future. And by 2020, she was an undisputed champion. That's remarkable. By 2020, Clarissa Shields was an undisputed champion. So I talk about those two boxers. I talk about Michaela Mayer, who was an Olympian in 2016. I talk about Marlon Esparza and her trajectory. She was an Olympian in 2020, actually won a bronze medal. And each fighter has a different trajectory. I talk about British fighters like Savannah Marshall, who's, Clarissa Shields' great friend of me. I talk about Natasha Jonas, who was, again, in the Olympics in 2012, had an injury, wasn't able to box for a little while, kind of retired from it, has her own child, then came back into it because Katie Taylor, for her, paved the way for having Katie Taylor and Clarissa Shields for being accepted as a professional at a higher level than any of women had prior to that. So
now,
she entered
Heather Hardy's actually in the book as well, right?
Well, yeah, Heather Hardy. And so that's the other side of it, is I talk about what I call old gang boxers. These are boxers who were not in the Olympics, maybe had amateur careers, but very, very few fights, and came in really learning the sport as professionals. And the thing with Heather Hardy is, as a boxer, is she had been doing amateur boxing in 2010, 2011, and turned pro like 2 weeks before the Olympics in 2012 on a Broadway boxing show. She had been invited by Lou DiBella for a one-fight deal. She did the fight. I write about the fight, which is like the first round. She got knocked down by the other girl, and she's like, "Oh, hell no. This is not happening to me." And fought like a demon the next 3 rounds to be able to win the fight. And one of the guys who was it was broadcast on a local market TV show, and he said something like, "Well, Heather Hardy, welcome to boxing."
See, I always enjoyed the fights between her and Shelley Vincent.
Oh, they were the best. And that there's a synergy there as well, because the first fight she had with Shelley Vincent was in 2016 in August. It was the same day that Clarissa Shields won her second gold medal. Anyway, so the great thing about the Heat's fight with Shelley Vincent is, first of all, it was on a PBC card. It was at an arena, an amphitheater in Coney Island, which was partially open. And it was August, so it was hot and raining really hard. And it was on an Errol Spence card. The thing was, they were going to have the Errol Spence fight and then have Hardy and Vincent after that. And they were not going to be broadcast on TV, it was NBC actually, but they were put on the streaming part of the card, which was the first time women were streamed on NBC.
And it was an amazing fight. It was
an amazing fight. And the thing about it is that entire theater was filled with Hardy and Vincent fans.
I did interviews with both ladies before the fight, and I got them to trash talk a little bit. And they really had some animosity against each other for a little bit there. And then the second fight, we weren't even sure if we were going to see a second fight.
We weren't sure we were going to see a second fight. It was on HBO, and that's an interesting story too. When they fought for the WBO title, the feather title, it was like Lou DiBella got it on HBO, and it was the only time it was the title fight, right? Well, other fight, it was at the little theater in MSG. Between Shelley and Heather, they sold out the place, right? Because all their fans, they were like buses coming from Rhode Island.
So now you talk about this in the book as well?
I do. And the thing with Heather is that she was like, "Hi, I'm retweeting this and that," and they weren't on the TV part of the card. And she said, "Oh, hell no. We are getting on TV. We are getting on HBO." And that by then, there had only ever been one women's fight, and that was Cecilia Brækhus and Callie Reese, which I talk about also in the book. So she calls the head of programming for HBO Boxing And she leaves a message. She says, "You got to put us on. We sold out your theater. We are the title fight. You got to put us on the card." Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, next day, Lou DiBella calls her, sounding very gruff. And he said, "Did you call, so-and-so?" And she's like, gulp. Yeah. He said, "Well, it effing works. You're on TV." But they wouldn't give them any more money. But there's no more money. So they got $20,000.
So what type of relationship do you have with Heather Hardy? Because it's a coincidence that you both are out of the same gym. But I mean, did you guys build a relationship at all?
Yeah, I would say we're friends. There's a big age gap and so on, but it's a relationship of mutual respect. And I've written about Hardy Heat over the years, and I've gotten to know her. We used to train around the same time in the mornings. There was a period of time in the new gym when on Water Street. I was coming at around 6:30 in the morning to train 3 mornings a week with my trainer, Lennox Blackmore. And Heather would usually come in at 7 to start her first clients, except on the weeks before a fight when she'd be there at 6. She'd beat me in because that's when she sparred, and that's this whole thing of a woman like Heat. She has to keep working always because she had a daughter, she was a single mom. And so when you're getting ready, camp is the extra hours you add to the day. So for her, camp meant coming in and having her sparring partners come in at 6 o'clock in the dang morning, and then she'd spar, finish sparring, and then start her clients, and then finish her clients, and then start pads and do all the stuff that you do. Another 2 hours after that, and then do road work on the bridge, and then she would go to conditioning gym.
So did you and Heather Hardy ever spar?
No, I never sparred with Heather. Not good enough. Oh my God, no. She'd kill me. But I watched a lot of her sparring, and I have this tremendous respect for her, and her career is everything right and everything wrong with the sport. The good things are she's a remarkable entrepreneur. She's a remarkable entertainment figure. She's a remarkable fighter. She demonstrates every time she's in the ring what it means to just go forward. But the downside is she's never really made any money. She only had one fight that was ever in 6 figures, and that's when, her boxing sister, Amanda Serrano, gave her the shot at the Undisputed fight, which a lot of people were like, why are you letting her do that? Well, because it's her sister, and because he gave Amanda the opportunity to fight her for her WBO belt, and they were always very close.
And you have Amanda Serrano in the book as well.
I write a lot about Amanda Serrano. I write about, her fight, the first fight with Katie Taylor, and the significance. I have a whole section on just the Taylor-Serrano fight at Madison Square Garden and the significance of that fight. But I also talk about Amanda throughout. I talk about Heather throughout. I talk about Alicia Ashley and fighters like Maureen Shea, who we call her the real
$1 million baby.
She's out of the Bronx, Irish and Puerto Rican, hello, but Mexican, sorry. Anyway, she's an amazing person, and she helped train Hilary Swank under Hector Roja. She was having early fights on Lou DiBella cards, and just really.
How did you, with all these different great women in this book? How did you figure out a process to write this book?
Well, I have it in 3 sections, and plus the introduction. As I said, the introduction is just kind of 20 pages of, hey, get your feet wet in the history of the sport. And then I look at it from like 2012 to 2016, 2017 to 2019, and then 2020 on forward to 2023. I mean, I finished it up with the Heather Hardy and Amanda Serrano fight. Plus, I snuck in that Amanda Serrano was going to do a 12-by-3. I literally was like, I got to add a sentence. And I was begging the people at MVP to give me a quote. I was like, please, I got a deadline. I'm over the deadline. But anyway, and then, but I also look back. I give it an international scope. You know, what was boxing in, and I look at 4 countries. I look at Argentina. I look at Mexico. I look at countries in Asia, or 3 countries, I guess, Japan, India, and what the significance of those programs were in terms of when the sanctioning bodies, the 4 majors, WBC, WBO, WBA, IBF, when they started bestowing women's belts, the women winning them were from Mexico, Argentina, and Asia, because American women were not being given the opportunities to even compete for those belts in a lot of cases because nobody wanted to pay for them, right? And when they did, you'd have a case where they'd leave it on the table because nobody would pay for a return engagement of a fight. I write about how Kalisha West had a WBA belt, and she only had a limited amount of money to do a fight. And she fought Ava Knight, and she ended up giving Ava Knight the whole money. She never made a nickel because otherwise she would have left the belt on the table. She would have had to give it back. So that was the state. So I write about that as contrasted to what the life was like boxing in the Olympics, what the life was like having an amateur thing, or like a fighter like Christina Cruz, who we know in the New York area, who opted to stay in the amateurs probably much longer than she might have otherwise, because she at least was guaranteed money, a living. She had a place to live. She lived in the Olympic Center, which has a lot of attraction. So I balance sort of the forward momentum of the incidents, but I also populate it with who these old gang boxers are that are suddenly reappearing on cards, like Melissa Hernandez, who's suddenly fighting, Chantel Cameron. Why is that happening? Why are these fighters coming out? Or Erica Farias, who was an amazing Argentinian champion, was kind of on the downside of her career, and yet she's being brought onto these fight cards with British fighters. So I really wanted to give context to what those cards were about, why they were there, and give a little bit of a shout out to these remarkable fighters.
And so now I mentioned one place that people can get the book, but is there any other places? Or
well, it's available online pretty much everywhere, wherever you buy your books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, the majors, some of the smaller ones, or you can just go to your local bookstore and order it. Take a few days, but you can.
And do you have book signings scheduled and things like that?
I do. I have a big book launch party planned at Gleason's Gym this coming Saturday, June 15th at 7:00. And the great part of that is I'm going to have a women's boxing forum as part of that with Alicia Ashley, Maureen Shea, Ronica Jeffrey, Melissa St. V, and Heather Hardy. She'll be on there too. It's sort of like it's like being home because it's Gleason's people who've come through Gleason's over the years, which makes it very special for me. And we'll also hopefully have Sparkle Lee, who's the great referee, first female referee in New York State, and she's also an alum of Gleason's first boxing class for women in the 1980s.
Wow!
So I thought she would bring. Yeah, she was in there. Jackie Atkins, who's who's become this amazing trainer, and she out in New Jersey and just does remarkable things for children. But she also was in that class. So I'm very excited to be able to also have these different voices from different generations in the sport to get their perspective on what their experiences are and how they see it, what the changes are and what still needs to happen. because we still are very far away.
So if there's any boxing fans out there, or any fans in general, just of anything, that want to become a writer, that have interest like you did, that write poems, write short stories, but they're just scared, what advice would you give them to write a book?
Well, first of all, don't be afraid. You have to overcome the fear. And for me, it was all this imposter syndrome thing, oh, I can't really do it. I'm not really good. You know what? Your words are your words. There are things that you learn that are skills that, you should be able to know grammar and spelling and things like that. If you can, if you don't, you can get things to help you. But more than that, just speak the truth. And if you start from a standpoint of being in the truth, it'll get you very, very far. The other thing is just write every day, or every day that you can, and start to learn who you are as a writer. For me, I learned writing by blogging every day, in the sense of me gaining my own confidence. And by writing pieces, some were 200 words, some were 800 words, some were 1,200 words. I really started to gain confidence in the process and started to believe in my abilities. And then from there, it's just a matter of giving yourself longer form projects to write and try to publish. And look, you're also free to just get in touch with me, and through the websites, and or DM me on social media, and I'm happy to talk you through it. I'm happy to mentor anybody who's really interested in writing history and the challenges of writing history and what that is about. And they are challenging. And I'm not an expert by any means, but I certainly feel I've gained confidence, and at the same time, a real appreciation for how challenging that prospect is.
So let me ask you this then. I know you kept bringing up things from your past, traumatic things, and you said about writing and about the boxing and things. So on another note, for people to sit down and write, I mean, did you find it therapeutic for mental health to write?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I journaled for years, and that was immensely helpful, because it puts one in touch. For me, I'm great at hiding feelings and staying away from my emotions. So writing brings an immediacy, and it kind of forces me to be present, if you will. So by journaling, it helps stimulate that opportunity for me to stay present with my feelings. If I can't quite be in them, writing them down helps me face that. But in terms of being a creative process, I try to bring a creative process to the writing of history. I'm telling a story, and it is still storytelling. And so I want it to be interesting. I want the reader to share my passion and my excitement for the subject. And I also write it in chunks, so that for the reader, there's just sections. You may have a chapter that's 20 pages, but it may be broken down into 3 or 4 sections, so that you as a reader can read this section and then sort of put it down. And I hope feel the hook to get to the next section.
Okay.
To make it exciting for you.
So if they can go out and get your books, if they want to stay up to date on what you're doing with the sport, they can go to the blog, the girls box. It's girls boxing.
Yeah, or on social media at Girl Boxing now. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, or whatever it's called these days, X. I just say Twitter, and so they can find me there. And
we want them to check out the War Room podcast as well. Podcast. So tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so with my partners, Chris Baldwin out in California, and Eddie Goldman, who's a fixture in New York City, sports writing. We call him the conscience of combat sports. He's a big iconoclast, and we just in the War Room, we just we're all independent. We don't owe anything to anybody, so we really try to explore whatever is happening in boxing, but try to get under the covers of it. Recent shows we've talked about what's really happening in Saudi Arabia. What is that all about? Or why don't they have women's boxing on these Saudi cards? Is that ever going to happen? What are the issues that we should think about? We did a whole series of shows on the Kinahans and their negative impact on boxing in terms of the sports corruption and those kinds of things. We've done a show on transgender sports, which we all learn from. So we try to, as I said, tackle different issues. We interview fighters. We've had Clarissa Shields on the show. We've had Heather Hardy. We've had Shelley Vincent. We've had Christy Martin when she put her book out. So we kind of, Shay Green we had fairly recently. So we try to balance it out with interviews or just us talking through what's going on. We had a couple of shows on the heavyweights, what's happening with Usyk and Fury. So it's not only about women's boxing, but we always try to have a portion of the show about.
Nice. All right, so I want to ask you about this. I don't know anything about this. I read this somewhere, and I want you to clarify it for me and for the fans so that we can learn something today. So you are actually on women's ratings panel. Explain that to me. What is that?
I am on the Ring magazine has a women's ratings panel. There are about 10 of us, I guess. And we convene every week reviewing all the fights of the week, and we come up with the ratings for women in all of the weight categories, and we also periodically review the pound for pound, and that is published in the Ring whenever we make an update.
Man, I don't know how you have time to do all this stuff. When do you sleep? So then explain to me, okay, but that somehow got you into being elector for the
Well, no, I already actually was. That's a little bit of a misnomer. I had been invited by the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I'm on the committee it's a small group that reviews the records of all the women who have retired, and we develop the list to vote on. And then I'm also a voter, an elector. So I vote, and I also am on a committee that looks at the record of everyone who retired and who's eligible, and we put up the folks to vote on. So for instance, Anna Maria Torres, we've had Jane Couch. These are the winners this year. Alicia Ashley last year, she got in on the first ballot. We were thrilled. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so tell me your boxing Mount Rushmore of female fighters, your top 4 favorites.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, because I knew
I hate this kind of question, man. Well, I mean, there's skill, and there's, which is.
But I mean, just to you in general, from doing all the history you've done.
I mean, I love Lucia Riker. For me in that era, Lucia Riker was. She was my pound for pound great. That's the late 90s, early aughts. She was in the film $1 Million Baby. I mean, she didn't have a huge career, but as a boxer, she was a beautiful fighter. She really was a beautiful fighter.
17-0, right?
Yeah, something like that. And had a very successful kickboxing career prior to that in Europe, and saw Christy Martin and said, oh, wow, I got to get to America. The thing with her is she was the first fighter that Freddie Roach ever trained who was a woman. And he really believed in her. And rightfully so. She was in a film called I think it was Shadow Boxers. It was a documentary about women who boxed in the early, it was like around 2000 or so. And so if folks can find that, you can see what I'm talking about. She's a beautiful fighter, but got a lot of crap for it because she's just a naturally muscular person. That's her body type. And there were those who ridiculed her for being somewhat masculine appearing, although I never saw that. But and people would say, well, take a chromosome test. I mean, it was really pretty vicious. Anyway, so I really like her. I love Katie Taylor. I think she's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't know how you can't like Katie Taylor. She's humble,
magnificent in the ring. Yeah, as a pure boxer, it's just she's up there.
She's so soft spoken. Have you ever heard her talk trash? Because I don't think she does.
No, that's not her way. That's not what she does. Even in private, she's I have to say, when I meet her, I am just a puddle. I cannot handle talking to her. It makes me completely I'm like, I have to talk to her like trainer. I can't talk to her. It's impossible. I love her. Yeah, she's also just because I look at the trajectory of her career as well. What she did in the amateurs and her the important significance of her as a fighter in the amateurs in terms of putting the Olympics over the line, getting it over the line in 2010 to be accepted as a sport is also really important and really significant. So I adore her very, very much. And Clarissa, she's a great fighter. Yes, like I'm curious to see what it's going to look like in her walking around weight. Should make it easy for her, I guess. Curious to see what happens to her. I mean, she's so singular that there's really no one to fight her. So because things are kind of falling apart at 168, 160.
I see that she's going to fight at heavyweight, right?
Yeah, she's going to fight at 175, and that's kind of wacky because heavyweight is over 200, but there really doesn't really exist. You're really fighting at 175, which, as I said, is her walking around weight pretty much. Or if she's any heavier, it's easy to come down to. It's not like she's got to get down to 154 again. So I'll be curious to see how that all works out. I just my heart goes to her too. I met her when she was 17 in New York. There's a photo in the book that I took of her and Alicia Ashley on a panel at WNYC. She was here with Sue J. Johnson, who eventually was the producer of their brilliant documentary T-Rex, which followed her around during that whole period of time that she became an Olympian. But there's just something so magnificent about her that you just see it, even
Honestly,
as a 17-year-old.
She seems to be, I don't want to, I'm not comparing her in any way, but she has like a Floyd Mayweather syndrome. You either love her or you hate her.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is the way it is. I'm in the love category, and I get it. I get her brand. I get what she's trying to accomplish. I see that in real time.
But you can also see how hard she works in and outside the ring to promote herself and to do everything she does.
It's a 24/7 thing, and yet she still had to go to England to fight, right? She had to go to UK and sign with Boxer because she wasn't getting it here, not the money she wanted. She got her $1 million in UK, not in America.
So right? Who is your fourth fighter?
My fourth fighter.
I mean, you don't have to have one.
Yeah, I guess I do. Again, if I go back in the era, then it's Ann Wolfe,
Nice.
She
gets left out of a lot of conversations, and I don't think she's ever gotten the respect she deserves.
No, I mean, she never got not to fight Layla. That was a fight that would have been something. But hey, listen, she's in the Boxing Hall of Fame. She's in the second class, so we do love her. I mean,
yes. Some of us do.
Some of us do. Some of us saw her in Wonder Woman and went, "Oh my God!"
Some of us realized that she was a real fighter. When I say the word fighter, she was a fighter
and a great trainer. Come on, I mean,
absolutely.
She is boxing. She's about boxing, and I got to meet her actually at Gleason's gym, and another one totally tongue-tied. Oh, can I take a picture with you? I wrote about you in my book. I was like completely flustered.
So I mean, you've met so many different,
I have
women.
met Lucia Riker. I mean, look, I'm on the board of the.
So who is the one woman in boxing history, dead or alive, that if you could have a conversation and sit down with her, who would it be that you have not met?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's I wouldn't mind if I go back in history. I'll talk to Hattie Stewart. She was a boxer in the 1880s. And was known as the female John L. Sullivan.
Wow.
the great bare knuckle boxer. And she was a bare knuckle boxer. And she, boxed on variety theater stages, but she also had real smokers. She was also in real fights. And there was a company called the Liggett Cigarette Company, and they used to put out 50 playing cards every year. Sort of like Topps cards now. They would have cards, and they would have all sorts of sports figures. So one year, and I'm forgetting the year, it's either 83 or 87, 1883 or 1887. It's eluding me. But there were two women on playing cards. One of them was Annie Oakley for being a trick shooter. And the other woman was Hattie Stewart. And she had a card that claimed that she was the champion boxer of the world. And nice. I just thought that was the coolest thing. So yeah, women have been boxing for a long, long time. Okay. She had her own playing card in the 1880s. So think about that.
So what do you, right now in female boxing, in women's boxing, what do you think the number one problem in the sport is?
No promotion. In America, it's zero. I mean, what do you got? I mean, okay, we had Nisa Rodriguez on a Top Rank card last night in New York. She is New York. We love her here. She's a gifted amateur who's turned pro. She's a New York City cop. Her story tells itself. She's a single mom. She's got 3 kids. She's fighting at middleweight. Great, tall, good fighter, good skills. But you got Michaela Mayer. When was the last time, she had her fight with Natasha Jonas in the UK? Okay. Who's she fighting here? Nobody. I mean, if you want to see women box, you got to watch team combat sports. I mean, that's crazy. But they're little one-rounders, and yet they're really great boxing in one round that they get to fight. You got women on little cards all over the country, but there's no broadcast here. We got ESPN occasionally has cards. There's no consistency.
Yeah, and they throw like 1 or 2 matches somewhere in the middle of the card,
and mostly they don't have women. Okay, it's rare when Top Rank has a woman at all. PBC, Infanta is what I have to say to them. A pox upon your family. They have 11 fights on the Canelo card. You can't put one goddamn women's championship bout on there. What the hell? You got thank God for Lou DiBella. He's still chomping away. He's got Mio. He's got some good fighters. He finally had Nina Hughes fight Chernica Johnson in Australia. He put them on the card with Kambosos and Lomachenko. Thank you, Lou. You got DAZN. I know more about British boxing right now, and new talent and who won the BBBFC prizes, championships than I know about anybody else in this country. I know Shushu, but right. Who else do I know about? Who do you see in boxing if you watch DAZN? They have Golden Boy, and thank you. Golden Boy has women. When they fight out of Mexico, they're on the headliners. All right. When they fight out of Costa Rica, they're the headliners. They come into America. I mean, here you got a Sinisa Estrada, right? An amazing freaking boxer. She's undisputed. Is she at the head of the card? No.
And a lot of boxing fans don't even know who she is. How sad is that?
That is pathetic. Where the hell are you doing, Top Rank? You got one of the best fighters ever in the history of the sport.
So tell me something that you're passionate about besides writing and boxing.
I love jazz. I've been really, but I'm a jazz fan of like the era of the Blue Note era, modal jazz, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, those guys. And I've been, but I'm really starting to explore hip hop in a much deeper way. People like Common, Kendrick, crossover jazz folks like Robert Glasper, Esmeralda Spalding. I mean, I just love jazz. So I'm really exploring music, and I'm kind of getting back to my I love salsa roots. So.
Okay. So I know you don't spar anymore, but this is a hypothetical question. And I know you said you wouldn't have been good enough to be in the ring with Heather Hardy, but if you had the opportunity, hypothetically, and you could spar Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor, or Carissa Shields, one opportunity, who would you want to spar with?
I'd say Katie. Because she's so versatile and too fast. The problem with Amanda Serrano, she's got that body shot, she'll freaking kill you. And Clarissa, are you kidding me? She's a giant. I'm 5'4". She's a giant. So I'll go with Katie.
Okay. So now listen, you obviously you love to write about women's boxing history and things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll write about some other boxing history. But I want your opinion on this because you are so diverse in boxing with your knowledge. What is your opinion of these YouTubers and these internet influencers being involved in the sport of boxing? Okay. Uh-oh. I see you getting a headache already.
Yeah. Well, it is the clown show to me. Misfits, all of that. It's whatever. But it's entertainment. Knock yourself out. But it's not boxing. It's not boxing, okay? Then there's Jake Paul, and I have to really have a whole other thought process about him because with Most Valuable Promotions, he got Amanda Serrano her $1 million, in that fight. And, how he's promoting now in terms of that relationship with Amanda Serrano and what that can give birth to, I have to give him props for that. But him boxing Mike Tyson is just overwhelming to me. That part of it I can't handle. But
okay,
as a promoter and as somebody who like for instance, the first time he met Amanda Serrano, he was having one of these Instagram influencer fight cards on Showtime, and he said to Steven Espinoza, I want a woman on the card. Now, he didn't have to say that because God knows nobody else is offering on Showtime. And he said, who should I have? And Steven Espinoza said, oh, you got to have Miranda Serrano. So that's how they met, is that she was on his card, and they started to train together in Puerto Rico. And he was like, holy shit, she's the real freaking deal. Okay. And that just changed his thinking. And they were talking more. Serrano left DeBello and went with MVP that summer as a consequence of all of that.
But I guess when I see Amanda Serrano, her name, everything she's done, Jake Paul comes into the sport, you got to ask the question of why would a woman with that big of a name, what she's already done in the sport, jump ship and go with a guy that's unproven, that sounds like a clown, that's acting like a clown, and you're risking your entire career if this doesn't work out?
Well, I think there were promises made, and he may be a clown show, but the people at MVP are not.
And that's what I think is a lot of behind the scenes stuff that the fans don't see.
They are the real deal.
Yeah,
they are the real deal.
He's just the face.
He's the face. He's like, whatever. He is whatever. But that company has real people, and they understand the sport. But look, Amanda Serrano, she would earn $18,000 was her top fee on Showtime? Until the Jake Paul card, but she actually got a real payday. Listen, Heather Hardy had one real payday in her entire life, and that was when she fought Amanda Serrano on the Undisputed card. That's it. The what she ever made, the most top 40,000, 30,000. She made more in MMA. And they sent a car to take her to the Garden, So
do you think you'll ever write a book that doesn't have to do with boxing?
Yes. Next book, not boxing.
Oh, do you already have plans for a next book?
I know I will write another book. I gotta get this born.
But
I
I
have one
mean,
more week.
do you think it'll have something to do with history on somebody, or will you just come up with a novel, like a fictional novel? Or
I don't know that I've tried fiction. I actually have 60,000 words of a novel that is just pure dreck. So it's just not my forte. But I I do have some ideas percolating. I'm not sure what they're going to look like, and I'm going to kind of spend the summer unwinding my brain a little bit from because a book takes a year for me. I also I'm more of a sprinter as a writer. I'm like a person in a tournament. You have 10,000 different little fight. You're in a tournament and you maybe have, if you're a runner, you have what 8 or 10 different runs as you get to going for gold, and then you're exhausted and you rest for a while. And that's me as a writer. I write a chapter. It's like run, 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 run. Gotta breathe. I can't. I'm not one of these write every day types. I can't deal with it.
So now you've been since '97. Basically, you've been involved in the sport of boxing,
Yep.
and you've talked to a lot of fighters. You've seen a lot of fights. You've seen a lot of things in the gym. So give me like one of your favorite boxing memories of all time that you've been involved in.
Oh, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, I just love going to fights. Like like Shelley Vincent, Heather Hardy. We talked about that earlier at Coney Island. Being in that amphitheater, being with friends, being at Madison Square Garden for the Taylor Serrano fight. Oh my God, the emotion of that day. And I got to spend some time with Marion Trivier, Lady Tiger, who MSG had kindly offered her a box. She's now, infirm. She's in a wheelchair most of the time. And just being with her in a box seat for a little while, looking down on the ring, watching as the crowd started to come into the theater, into the main arena of Madison Square Garden, and the house of Muhammad Ali, and talking to her and seeing how wistful she became when she thought about the notion that they were going to earn $1 million a piece. And she's like, I never may earn much more than $1,000. And that was for a title fight, a championship fight.
Wow.
So being with this remarkable figure in that early era in the 1970s of women who, instead of burning their bras, they went to court to win the right to box. In fact, in Canastota, we're inducting Teresa Kibbe posthumously as the trailblazer. She was another very important figure out in California in that era of the 70s. It was very poignant for me to be there with her, and then to be in the stands, down watching the fight with Jill Morley, who's a wonderful. She's an amateur fighter. She had won the Masters National Golden Gloves Award fight a few years ago, and did a brilliant documentary, really more of a tone poem called "Fight Like a Girl," which looked at fighters like Sue Reno and Kimberly Tones and their trajectory, and Maureen Shea. I don't know what their journeys were like in the sort of like prior around 2010 or so. So seeing it with her, knowing that she also was very connected to the sport, was so poignant. And then we ran into Melissa St. V in the stands, and we just had this moment of like, wow, we made it. It's here. This is the apex. We've cracked the code somehow. And watching the women, I think it started really with when they started singing Sweet Caroline, which is not necessarily something we do in America, but in the UK sport boxing, it's de rigueur. And because of Katie, we did this Sweet Caroline. And I swear there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Everybody was swelled by the emotion. And,
Seeing that you just brought that up, I've always wanted to know this, and I know other people have talked to me about it. Do you know the history why that song has ever been brought into boxing?
I really don't.
Because it has nothing to do with
with
boxing.
it. It's like a British
And
thing, and I have no idea. Other than when Caroline Dubois in UK comes out, it makes some sense because she's Caroline. But I have no
I've
idea.
always wondered the history, because that song just seems so odd to play at a boxing match,
I
and they
know.
do it over and over.
Over and over. It's like a thing in UK, you know. It's like, oh, okay, you know, it's a UK fight because they're playing Sweet Caroline. And you're like, what a song.
Well, I hope someday you put that in a book,
I'll
because
find it.
a lot of people are going to want to know the history of how that got into boxing.
I have no idea.
All right. Well, I got one last question, and then I want to
Sure.
wrap this up. It's been a great podcast. I've enjoyed just your
Thank you.
stories and everything.
I
It's
so appreciate your time. And
so. Did you walked into the Gleason's gym in 1997, and
Yep.
now where you sit now with the people you've met, the memories you've had, the history you've sat down and done, the 3 books. I mean, do you ever just sit down and look at the journey and just go, wow, if I would have never walked into Gleason's gym, I would never have the life I have and the experiences and the memories I have?
yeah, I do. I'll tell you, I think when I first really felt that way when I was approached by the Boxing Hall of Fame to get involved in selecting people, the women for the first class to vote on. And I burst into tears when I got that official letter, because it's like, who would have ever imagined in a lifetime? My only other experience like that had nothing to do with boxing. You know, my work life. The period of time I worked for the fire department, I'm a procurement specialist, believe it or not. Anyway, so I was a contractor. I was the contract manager for building the city's 2 new fireboats, one of which was the 343, named for the 343 firefighters who died at 9/11. And I was invited to go down to the shipyard, and I had the honor of christening the boat with a bottle of champagne. And that's the only other experience of my life that was just like, to say it wasn't on my bingo card is,
Yeah.
or part of a whole trajectory of where my life went. That was the only other thing. And for boxing and that boxing life, it had to do with that honor of being involved in the transition to bringing women into the Hall of Fame. That's just remarkable to me, that I had that honor and continue to have that honor to play a role, to be associated with finally giving women their place alongside their boxing brothers.
You know, well, we use the figure of speech, opening different doors in life to find our path or go different. But you literally opened a door to a gym that
Yes.
found you a path to where you are today and where you've gone through all these years. So I
Isn't that
think that's
crazy?
pretty amazing.
I am. I feel like, what is that? Cary Grant movie, you know, sorry, Gary Cooper, you know, playing that baseball movie, you know, I'm the luckiest man that ever. Just remember the echo of the film. I used to watch a lot. I also love baseball, but that's another whole conversation.
Okay. Well, listen, I want to promote your book one more time. It's been on the bottom of the podcast the entire time, where everybody can go to get it.
Thank you.
So hopefully everybody that watches the podcast, you'll be able to get it. And this will be on YouTube as well, and Facebook, so they can see this over and over. But tell me the name of your book, kind of give me a brief description and where people can go to get it.
Sure. The name of the book is The Promise of Women's Boxing, A Momentous New Era for the Sweet Science. It's published by Rowman and Littlefield, and it's available at any of the online outlets, such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or you can go directly to the publisher's website. You can just type in The Promise of Women's Boxing in your browser, and it'll bring you to all of the outlets that sell the book. And it covers, it looks at the sport and the figures who are important to the sport from the period of approximately the 2012 Olympics till through 2023, through last summer.
All right. And with that, the truth has spoken. Hold on.